starting in
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi, this is Veronica.
And I'm Studio Steve.
We are the Pod Sound School.
And this is PodBitz. PodBitz is a quick and easy way to digest the latest news and events in podcasting.
Learn about actionable tips to podcast like a beast.
Listen to our podcast recommendations.
And be in the know with what is up in the PSS community.
And we do it all live.
While the clock is ticking.
Unedited.
And raw.
So get those ears ready.
Crank those speakers up.
And let's dive in. Hey, welcome back everyone to another episode of PodBitz.
Hello everybody, happy Wednesday.
Yeah, so for those of you just tuning in, we record PodBitz live every Wednesday, 12 p.m. Mountain Standard Time on Twitter.
We post this episode on our podcast later today, and we also post a video on our Facebook page for replay, the Pod Sound School.
Yes, so check out the Facebook page if you miss it, and then come see us on Wednesdays, because it's a lot of fun. We've been having a lot of fun here. After the 13-minute sequence that we go through with a pre-recorded track in the background, then we stick around on Twitter for a Q&A.
Yeah, we'll be hanging out and talking to you guys.
We'll be hanging out and responding to any comments or questions that you might have. So if you ever have questions for us, that's a good place to come ask us some questions as well.
Yes. So for this week on the PSS community, we have a very interesting episode that we just released on our podcast. Is with Sarah Rhea Warner. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who don't know who Sarah is, she's the producer of Girl in Space podcast and Right Now podcast. She's a very successful podcaster.
Yes.
We wanted to have her over on our podcast so she can share how she got to be so successful with her two podcasts. Mm-hmm. The interview is so full
cool.
of good information for those of you who are just starting in podcasting or who have been podcasting for a while and can see results. She has a very good insights because she's also a podcast coach.
Yes.
So she achieved so much success with her two podcasts that she was able to be an entrepreneur, a full-time creator, a speaker, and she's going to be at PodFest next week. So I'm going to be hunting her.
Yes, we're going to hunt her down.
Yes.
Yeah, so go check out her shows, Girl in Space or Right Now, like writing with a W. Mm-hmm. Very good, informational, educational podcast.
Yes.
I listen to Right Now all the time. It has a lot of good writing tips.
Yes. So Girl in Space is a sci-fi podcast, and Right Now is for people who, like me, are very passionate about writing.
And then also we put out a premium episode this week on our PSS Overachievers Club, which is our membership program that you can get to by going to podsoundschool.com/premium. And we right now over there are focusing on monetizing, and the episode we just released was about email marketing, and really informative stuff if you want to get your email marketing set up, which is a must, by the way. And as a podcaster, you might be thinking, well, I don't need email, but you actually really are missing out if you're not collecting emails. But
yes. And we want to give a shout out for a couple of members of our Facebook group, Podcasting for Buses. The first one is for Milo Million.
Yeah.
Median?
Or is it Million?
Million.
Mm-hmm.
Milo Million. 2 days ago, she asked me for permission to post a survey because she's doing market research for her podcast. And this is something that we recommend to every podcaster who are just starting with their podcast is to do market research. And also I want to give a shout out to Nikolai Comic. He's doing also all the preparations for launching his podcast, and he posted pictures of his studio, and it is so
it's
cool.
It's really cool.
So,
okay, let's get to our segment.
Yeah.
This Week in Podcasting.
All right, this week in podcasting, what do we got?
So,
we were going to talk about SuperCast.
SuperCast.
SuperCast is a membership platform that will allow listeners to subscribe in their podcast players. So they're wanting to be better than Patreon, right? And so they can actually click on a link within their podcast player and then subscribe right there in the podcast player. And they announced during Podcast Movement Evolutions that they had received $2 million in seed funding from leading investors in technology and startups, which is super exciting. The company also announced that the new CEO and co-founder, Jason So Hoy, And Jason was the COO and the Chief Growth Officer of 99 Designs. If you're unfamiliar with 99 Designs, Jason basically grew that company from a small startup to a global team of over 120 people. So for him to be involved in SuperCast, it says that SuperCast is on the rise, right?
Yes. And for those who are not familiar with membership platform, I know that maybe you have heard about Patreon. This is a way that you guys can monetize your podcast, and is by producing and posting premium content behind a paywall for your listeners. So they buy a monthly membership, they can access your premium content. We all know like how much time you have to put into creating your podcast episodes and how much time you have to put into writing and producing and all that. So this is a good way to monetize. SuperCast said that the investment will be used to hire a remote team and develop additional platform features like the recently added support for multi-show networks, where admins can manage content, subscribers, and analytics for multiple shows under one account. Now out of beta
or beta.
or beta. Oh, Veronica.
Yeah, they're out of beta.
SuperCast promises to eliminate the middleman by making it easy for listeners to subscribe and pay with Apple Pay and Google Pay.
Yeah.
So check it out.
It sounds really cool.
The other thing I wanted to mention is that the other day, James Critland, if you guys are not familiar with James, he's the editor of Pat News. He discovered a podcast called Pat News, and he's the editor of Pat News. And he has a podcast called Pat News too, right?
Yes.
But anyway, so he contacted Spotify's infringement unit, and they removed the podcast within 2 hours and are investigating the matter. And also the podcast was removed from Anchor within 18 hours. So his advice was to trademark the name of your podcast. That's very important. You don't want this to happen. And also, if you are thinking about launching your podcast soon and you're looking for a cute name, you know, the most important thing is to do research and make sure that nobody else is using that name, because you can get in trouble. And can you imagine, like, after having a few episodes out, then that your podcast is taken down by the podcast players?
Yeah.
That would be a shame. So anyway,
that would be a bummer.
And
we recently did an episode with an IP attorney, Taylor Tiemann, and she talked all about the importance of trademarking, the naming of your podcast, and also when deciding on the name of your show, how important it is to do the research, like Veronica was saying.
And getting an attorney on board with your trademark can be very costly, and the filing fees are costly too. But, you know, it's a good investment if you're thinking about making your podcast part of your brand. And also, Taylor recently launched the Trademark Toolkit, which is an online course that guides people through the process of DIY filing your trademark. So we'll leave the links
in the description of this
in the
episode.
description of this episode.
This week in your queue.
In my queue this week, I have an awesome recommendation from Earbuds Collective. If you haven't heard of Earbuds, they do community-driven podcast recommendation newsletters. And so a shout out to our friend who recently accepted us as her podcasting cousins, Ariel Nissenblatt. Every week, you get a list of 5 podcasts according to a theme that are curated by different people, which is really fun. And this week, their theme was Backstage Pass, and today's recommended episode was from this really cool music podcast called Broken Record. It's an awesome podcast hosted by Rick Rubin and Malcolm Gladwell. And it's an amazing podcast where the musicians you love talk about their life and their craft and what inspires them. And I was so excited to see that Rick Rubin was the host of a podcast, because he's an incredible personality in the music industry.
I don't know who he is.
Yeah, and that was mine. So
mine is Beyond 6 Seconds podcast, hosted by Caroline Keel. Caroline interviews entrepreneurs, creatives, and business leaders who share their stories of how they grow their careers, overcome big challenges, and make a positive impact in society. On her last episode, she interviews Jessica and Sarah, stand-up comedian based in LA. I've listened to a few episodes of the podcast, and this has been my favorite interview so far. She has so many good insights about changing careers and going and pursue your passion. And so this is one of my recommended this week.
Tip of the week.
Wait till I tell you everything.
Okay, tip of the week. This week, we're going to do a tip all about marketing strategy that comes from our recent episode that we just put out, Sarah Ray Werner. And it's about making the distinctions between a creator audience and a listener audience. So each of those audiences have their perks. So for example, on Twitter is an amazing place to get involved with the podcasting community and fellow podcasters. And there's a ton of perks that come with that. But other podcasters aren't typically your listeners, right? So one thing that Sarah did when she was first starting Girl in Space, which I was happy to hear because we do the same for our clients' Twitter accounts. When she was getting going, she went to the Twitter profiles of other sci-fi podcasts and followed and interacted with their followers. You know, she thought if these people like this podcast, then chances are they would like my podcast. But she didn't harass them or to come to her show or to come listen to Girl in Space. She just followed them and interacted with them. And, you know, especially people who have less than 1,000 followers, say a couple hundred followers, they're going to notice when you follow them and they'll be a lot more open to interacting with you.
And checking you out.
So the tip of the week for that is follow the followers of similar podcasts.
Yes. And just make the distinction between following people within your community of podcasters and following people and interacting with people that can be your potential listeners.
Yeah, and another thing she said is be kind and interested, show interest with your social media interaction, and make sure that you're always providing value.
Yeah, that's very important.
And okay, well, that we were a little behind the clock on that one a couple times. I might have to cheat a little bit in the editing and move some things around, but this week, if you haven't already rated our podcast, please come do so. There's an easy way to do it. You go to ratethispodcast.com/podsoundschool.
Yeah.
And that
do it on Podchaser. If you're interested to take your podcast up a notch to access our premium content, remember that you can do so at podsoundschool.com/premium. All the links to the sources that we cover during this PodBitz will leave on the description of this episode. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at podsoundschool. And join our Facebook community, podsoundschool.com/community.
Yep. And until next time, guys, happy casting.
Rock on.
Sometimes all a school needs is a little facelifting. Laboratories functionally designed for the student's use. The new miracle of modern tools for instruction.